Okay, I'm ready to go. Go when you are.
Well, go for it.
Awesome, Brenden. It is a pleasure having you on Product Hunt Live. I know we've been wanting to do this for a while. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect.
It's cool to see the evolution of your whole live.
Yeah, of which as an investor you've been here since the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, cool. So there's a lot I want to get into, and we have a lot to talk about. But first, I want to start with a question. When people ask you what it is that you do, what do you tell them?
Meaning, what do I do
Or
for the company, or what does the company do?
both.
Okay. Um, I am a co-founder of a company called LaunchKit. LaunchKit believes that mobile developers spend too much time on monotonous tasks when building a mobile app and not enough time focusing on what makes their app unique. So we're working on a series of tools that help take away basically the need to spend a ton of time on the minutia of building an app, and give developers and designers their time back to focus on what is different, that makes their app different than the other million in the App Store. And so LaunchKit has a series of products that help you actually build your app faster by making it easier to design and create in-app UI and user educational screens without having to spend a week having your designer and engineer work on them together. We have a series of tools that once it's time to launch it, it helps you build a better website and a better App Store presence. And then once you have it out there, we have monitoring tools to help you figure out who your best users are, grab all the app reviews that you're getting and automatically put them into Slack, and keep your team up to date with sales reports also by getting emails and Slack reports. So kind of like across the entire spectrum of needs for mobile developers. So that's what the company does. I am I'm on a team of 4 people. Everyone else is full-time engineers, and I sort of bounce around. So we have I've traditionally done all the design, and a little bit of the front end engineering, but for the most part, that's just on the marketing side. So I've been doing the design and marketing, and now we have people who've come in and are helping us helping us with those 2 specific things that have recently joined the team. So.
And you come to tech from a music background.
Yeah, I sort of got into this by accident. I was working. I went to school in Nashville, which got me heavily into the music business. And so I moved to Chicago and worked for a record label for a while, then a management company, where we were working with tiny artists all the way up to big artists. And it was sort of like we were the venture capitalists, where we'd go and find the talent, fund them at the beginning, and try to grow them into something much bigger. Although the model for record labels isn't quite as nice as it is for VC, or for my opinion is fair. I think the structure is wrong there, or incentives are misaligned. But well, like so a VC funds a startup and is actually buying a piece of the startup, and as the startup gets more popular, the VC will always own that piece that they bought when the startup was worth very little. With record labels, you sign a new artist and you sign them to one deal, and as the artist gets more popular, you have to renegotiate the deal for the next album. So even though you were willing to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars to record the first album, when they're doing the 4th or 5th album, you're having to renegotiate at a significantly different valuation. And if they leave to work for a different label, then you sort of lose some of the benefit of growing their career at the beginning. Because of that, the label deals end up looking really awful for the artists, because the labels are just trying to get as much as they can get and lock in an artist for as long as they can. And I don't know, the whole thing just seems misaligned.
Why don't labels take a page out of VCs and
I think that we're seeing that. There's also a big the music industry is such a mess. There's also sort of a big change where in the old music industry, the label was the one that had all the power and was making all the money because people were buying records. And so touring revenue and merch revenue all were pale in comparison to the money that was spent on purchasing music. And so the label actually only made money when people bought records. They didn't make money on anything else. In the new music industry, no one's buying that stuff anymore, and it's still to be seen whether Spotify will be able to replace the retail side of the music industry, but it's definitely driving a lot of the revenue to touring and to merch and to all these other things that the artist ends up making money off of. But the labels, the way that label deals were structured, they traditionally weren't getting a piece of that. It was so the other way, where like labels actually, it was part of the contract. It was called tour support, that labels would give artists a large amount of money just to go on tour, but they didn't ask for any money in return for like ticket sales. They just were doing that because they would end up selling more albums by supporting a band. So now the labels, whether it's labels, I mean, Live Nation was actually one of the pioneers in this, where they're doing, 10 years ago, they were called 360 deals. I don't know how they've evolved because I haven't been paying as much attention, but sort of saying, we're going to sign you as like, we're basically going to try to represent you across the board and then take a percentage of the money you make across the board, which sort of that's what managers have typically done. And so labels are trying to become more managers, and I don't know, it's a tough industry.
Are you not optimistic about that industry? Do you think it's going to fix itself?
I think that there's probably similar to how San Francisco or the tech world got a little frothy over the past few years. I think that the music industry as a whole went from being a place where people wrote music and sang live on the radio, and then with recorded music, suddenly like it became this industry where you could make probably a lot more money than you really should have been able to make. And so I think they're going through a longer adjustment where I think they'll be fine. I think there's just some adjustments that have to be done. I mean, when I was working at the label in Chicago, we were sort of a subsidiary of Sony. And when the head of Sony came to visit our office, because we represented John Mayer, and he was in town when John Mayer was exploding, he was in town for a show. Sorry about the sirens. He came.
I feel like I should be having the.
He came to our office after the day after a show in a bulletproof van. That's the level of importance that he thought, as the CEO of a record label, he needed. It literally in a bulletproof van. And so the music industry, like the entertainment industry in general, but it's an industry, it was, at least for the music side, was an industry of excess. And so I think the whole thing shrinks down a little bit and it becomes a little bit more rational, and maybe it returns to a little bit of normalcy.
Or has been happening?
Well, I mean, I I feel like the tech industry loves to write about itself. When things are good, it loves to write about how great things are. The minute that becomes less interesting and things start to be not as good, then every article on TechCrunch is about how valuations are down and companies are shutting down. And was the other one? Oh yeah, there was a whole article on like sublets are up because companies are running out of money. And so yeah, I definitely think there's an adjustment going on right now. Also a needed adjustment. I think things were, even as the entrepreneur who likes to be in a seller's market, I think that things didn't really make much sense at a certain point. So I've always had a little bit of a different philosophy on raising money and valuations and taking advantage of a frothy market.
And what is that philosophy?
Well, I don't think you should raise money just because it's easy to raise money. And I also don't think you should inflate your valuation just because investors will pay it. In most cases, because I think that there are long-term effects for changing how your company's capitalized and the valuation of the company's capitalized. And I think that there'd be a lot less stories right now of people who are unable to raise Series A's or Series B's or whatever if they had been maybe a little bit more rational when they were raising the previous round. So I think we have intentionally always tried to be more rational with what we consider the valuation of our company to be, and we have raised significantly less money than we have been offered. And I think all of that has put us in a better position for every other sort of opportunity that we've had, whether it be raising more money or just not being seen as this, much more valuable company than we really should be. Stuart from Slack talked about this a little bit when I saw him speak a few weeks ago, a month ago. He was saying that, Slack's been offered a I mean, even though Slack is this huge success and is a $2 billion company or whatever, he was like, that's pale in comparison to the money that he's been offered and the valuation he's been pitched. And he was like, I believe our company needs to be able to justify a valuation, not just take one. And so he's turned money down because he A, doesn't need it at the time, like, and B, he's not going to take money just because someone will give it to him at a giant valuation. Even though you could say that Slack has been given money at a giant valuation, I think that he's saying that he feels like he can kind of justify where it is now, where the money that he's actually been offered is way more than he can justify. And if he takes it now and then the IPO market falls apart and then he tries to IPO and it's not as much as his last valuation, all the articles are negative. And so he's looking at not this round, but all the rounds ahead of it. And I don't think, I know a lot of our industry has not been doing that for the past few years. So my philosophy is more in line with his, and so that's kind of how we've been operating over the past few years. So
Yeah. You guys have taken a modest $2 billion valuation.
Yeah, we try to keep it under 3 billion.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you do what you can.
Yeah.
So when you look at your, career going from music to tech, what do you think kind of is a thread that ties everything together? Like what, underlying that, is it a core principle or something that,
I didn't mean to go from music to tech. I basically was working for this label. Part of my job was to update websites because it was when MySpace was popular. And when MySpace became popular, probably 40 or 50 other websites popped up over the next year about other places for bands to post their information. And because it was a new world, bands thought we need to have our information everywhere. So we'd get like John Mayer would get a new string of tour dates, which was always good news, and then they'd be handed to me, and I'd have to post them into 50 different places, send them to 10 different distribution lists, and basically my entire week was taking these 30 dates and making sure that they were everywhere they needed to be, which was a fairly monotonous and not the type of work that I was hoping to be doing. And so I left and started a company called Artist Data with a friend that solved that very singular problem of keeping an artist's information synchronized across many different internet properties, and actually physical. We would also update local newspapers. So if he was playing in San Francisco, we'd make sure the San Francisco Chronicle had the date and had all the information they needed. And it was all done automatically, but it became sort of the central data management platform for touring musicians. And so by the 3 years during that process, which was a very hard 3 years where I learned about business models that didn't work, and I learned about how to go into extreme credit card debt. At the end of the 3 years, suddenly I had a startup as opposed to the beginning when I was building a website. And at the end of the 3 years, I'd have discussions with venture capitalists. And then when I sold the company, I sold it to another startup and moved out here. And so suddenly was in the tech world. But it wasn't I want to start a company. I'm going to move to Silicon Valley and start a company. Like it was just sort of a very natural evolution of my career. I think I think it's nice because I sort of went from being the VC at a record label to being the artist. And so it felt sort of like a natural progression of, okay, now we're the starving artist and we need to prove that we're actually talented enough for people to buy our record. And so that transition process was very natural to me. It wasn't like I went from a big corporate job to doing a startup.
Right. Mm-hmm. And how is your sort of philosophy of let's start with management and managing people and picking people and hiring people? How has that evolved over the last years? Like what now, if you knew that when you were starting your first company?
Slowly. It's evolved slowly. I mean, the one thing that I've done, I've never had a big team. And my co-founder Taylor and I, when we started, we actually started LaunchKit. The first product that we were building was called Cluster, and it was a private photo sharing app that we had then turned into several private photo sharing apps. But when we started it, we sort of took the approach of, we don't want to, just because we raise money, that doesn't mean we have to hire 20 people. Like we never really grew the team that much because we were like, the product and the growth and the problems that we need to solve should be the reason that we evolved the team, not like some companies I've seen, like, oh, we raised $2 million, let's hire 10 people. And then they run out of that money very quickly. So we've always, I really love working with really small teams that work really well together, can execute incredibly fast. And so when you have a small team, there isn't a ton of management when it comes to the more traditional management sense. it really is setting up an environment where everyone can be as productive as possible, and do their best work. And so um, we try to reduce the need for any real meetings. I mean, we very rarely are meeting. We have um, processes in place that kind of keep everyone on the same page, and they're not as formal as maybe they could be, which makes it occasionally, sometimes we need to realign everyone. But for the most part, like, everyone's working on the stuff that they're working on, and we work together when we need to. But we try to manage as little as possible. And I think at our stage, honestly, if we had people that, if management was a thing we needed to do, it would be problematic at a smaller stage.
How do you turn down meetings when it's not just internally, like people who ask you for coffee, or just potential partners? You wrote this post on Corp Dev, which is really great.
Um, I do more meetings than the rest of the team, by orders of magnitude. I want to keep everyone as focused on. I mean, most people hate meetings. As CEO, and sort of, I feel like I'm the more of the relationship builder. That's part of my job. So I tend to take more external meetings, and I'm happy to do it. I use an app called Calendly, I think is how you'd say it out loud. And it allows you to take your calendar and sort of mark out the times that you're available, and it also syncs with your Google Calendar and knows when you might have already had a meeting. And so I have, like, basically the beginning of the day and end of the day blocks that are open almost every day, that if someone wants to meet, I'll send them the calendar link and they can just pick a time that works for them. But it's times that I've set up so it doesn't get in the middle of my, like, flow for the day. So I generally am always happy to meet with, whether it's young entrepreneurs or other companies that want to talk about how we could work together, whatever. That stuff doesn't distract me too much, as long as it's not like in the middle of the day.
Right.
So
let's talk about when you talk to young entrepreneurs, what do you find yourself consistently telling them?
It depends on what they're looking for.
Typically,
someone who comes to me and says, I want to launch an app, I've got a long list. It's funny, a friend of mine introduced me to a guy who wanted to build an app, and he said, okay, so we're going to launch this app. What are the top 10 things you'd recommend? And I went through this list, and it probably wasn't 10 things, but I ended up describing LaunchKit, and I really didn't mean to. But I was like, make sure you do this. If I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done this, I wish I would have done this. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, that's all we're doing with LaunchKit, is we're building all the stuff that we wish we would have done when we launched Cluster. Someone who's starting out as just an entrepreneur, I think I try to spend as much time as possible understanding, or asking them, so I can understand really what they want, like what their main goals are, because there have been a series, like, some of the frothiness has led me to have conversations where it's like, oh, you want to start a company? Why? And they're like, I just want to start a company. Like, it's just so cool to have a startup. And so trying to understand what their motivation to be an entrepreneur is. And then sort of the conversation can go a couple different areas. Like, if they come with an idea and they want to get funding, to try to set expectations on what their product, the likelihood of their product getting funding, and what type of people. And I've met with people who I'm like, I've met with people where I'll say, like, I really, really would recommend you not quitting your job, or not starting this until you get a lot further, because it doesn't seem like this is going to work. And there's no proof that it would. And I would say that I could probably explain 10 reasons why it wouldn't. So it's more like, you're not quite at the stage where you should be trying to go raise money. To other people, who is like, oh, I can introduce you to 10 people today because this is such a great idea. So
a lot of people think they can raise money without traction, or like,
and they can. I mean, for the past couple of years, they've been able to. And there's plenty of investors. That's the thing. There's plenty of investors who want to be able to say that they invest in startups regardless of where they're located, and they can, if it's a nice looking app, they'll throw some money into it. And I don't know. I don't think that there's a lot of founders that don't have an investment strategy on, okay, why am I raising from the group of people I'm raising for right now? What does this round mean compared to the next round? What type of people do I want for the next round, and then the one after that? Because it's sort of like chess to me, where if you just go like, I want to raise money, and you take the first checks you can find, you kind of potentially screw up all the next steps. And so, I mean, yeah, I've gone about things a little bit differently, and Taylor and I have made decisions that were not necessarily, like, 3 years ago, like, it was a party round was the thing to do. Just like take 1,000 checks if you can. And when we raised money for Cluster, although we had tons of interest, we decided to only, take a very small set of investment, get a very small set of investors. We only had 5. And with LaunchKit, we did it a little bit differently. We raised a round for LaunchKit where we let a little bit more angels in, but that was just because it was people who were our customers who were already using it or who had proven value over the past few years. But each time we raised money, we did it saying like, okay, here's how much we're raising, here's the plan for this, and we need to set the valuation so when we get where we want to go and we go to raise more money, we won't be in a weird position where we've raised a too high of a valuation or we raised too much money or too little money. It's like you have to be very careful about that process.
Too hectic, too chaotic?
Well, so I have never raised a party round, so I can't say why they're bad. I can say why we preferred to have a very strong lead investor, and it was very clear who the lead investor was. So we were really, really fortunate to work with Steve Anderson of Baseline Ventures, and when we went to raise money, he funded half the round, and he wanted that, and we wanted that, and we wanted it because he's sort of the sounding board that we have, and he holds us accountable, and he's the one that we make sure that all the other investors look to him to be like, yeah, Steve is the one who's managing this investment for the other people who are involved. I've seen founders who have done party rounds get into trouble where there isn't necessarily any investor who's managing the investment. And although management sounds like a non-founder friendly thing, a pain in the ass, like it's very good to be accountable to someone. And when you raise money from 30 people and no one's put in more than $200,000, none of those people feel like they need to put the time in and the effort in to help the company along, unless the company reaches out. Most angel investors are happy to help when the founder reaches out, but I think it's really good to have a clear lead who's the person that the founder's working with. So, yes. When I use the term party round, I would say that means there isn't a lead, that it's just a bunch of checks from probably high profile Silicon Valley people or just random people, but there isn't necessarily a lead. I think you can totally take like money from a lead and then take 1,000 checks if you want. Right. I wouldn't do it, but it's really nice to not have 100 investors.
Right, just from effort perspective, or just like managing people's investors.
Yeah, it's a personal preference for people. For me, I think that having a small number of institutional investors who do this for a living has traditionally been easier than having lots of different angel investors involved that aren't as focused on investing as a business. We have angel investors, and they all add value in different ways. But I think that when I'm thinking about like building a company, it's like I'm a VC fan. I like having professional investors who think about this stuff all the time.
You yourself have started. I don't know to what extent you could talk about it. But you have an interest in angel investing?
Yeah, I'm lucky to have a bunch of talented friends who are doing a bunch of cool stuff. And so, occasionally, if it makes sense, I enjoy, contributing and being a part of what they're doing. I always sort of preface the conversation with, if you're interested in taking a tiny little check, then I'd love to support you. If you don't need it, that's totally fine. Like I do it more as a way of just sort of being involved with some of the things that friends are working on, more than this is a way to make a ton of money. So, yeah.
And do you have aspirations of being a full-time investor? Or when you look out at 5 or 10 years down the road, how do you see the arc of your?
I think it would be fun, but I love building products, as is clear with my data on Product Hunt. Like I really, really love solving, and they could be small problems, but I really, really love building solutions to problems. And I think that the ability to be able to take a computer that has a fixed price and basically, go into a text editor and create something that people can use that creates value, and sort of be able to do that without any other raw materials is such an amazing thing. And I just never get tired of doing it. So it would be very hard for me to imagine myself just sitting on the sidelines and just not doing that at all, and do it full time, just having meetings and helping. I mean, I love helping other entrepreneurs, but I think I need to still be building in some way.
When you think about, I mean, as you mentioned, you're like, you know, you've released the most products on Product Hunt, if not the most, you know, certainly up there. How is your sort of, you talk about your evolution as, you know, a product builder, like what have you learned throughout building so many products and launching them and releasing them and getting feedback?
Um, Mostly to launch and release and get feedback as quickly as possible, and to try to take the smallest chunk size problem as you possibly can at the very beginning, and just get something out in the world that solves at least that small chunk size. It took us, my first company, again, when I was just building a website, not a company, it took us way too long to get the first product out. It took years to get something that we were going to charge people for. And even though we were able to kind of rapidly iterate when it was out, not that I knew what that meant at the time, it still was like we bit off a way too big of a chunk size at the very beginning. And it was really hard to understand the data that we were getting back, because we were sort of like, it was a big muddy problem. So, I mean, some of the stuff I posted to Product Hunt is more like fun side projects that I've done over the past five years. And they're just these silly little like weekend projects that have this one utility, and it just sort of solves that well. And sometimes you do that and you're like, yeah, there's no reason for this to get any more complicated. Other times it's just the first itch of like a much bigger, that you're scratching on a much bigger problem. And it's like, oh, if we solve this well, that's kind of what LaunchKit is. I mean, we launched, our first product was for LaunchKit. LaunchKit sort of was born out of Product Hunt, because we were like, all right, we're going to put our first product that was Review Monitor, which is the thing that takes reviews and sticks them into Slack. We were like, our whole strategy was, let's put this on Product Hunt and just see if it resonates, because you guys have built an amazing community of people who really like can sort of, a lot of times, can separate great stuff from stuff that doesn't have lasting value. And so I think that we threw that on there and it did really well. We got amazing feedback from the community. We're like, okay, there are still a lot of problems to solve around app development. We're not just crazy after doing it for a few years. Like there's still a lot of stuff to do. So we put our second thing on Product Hunt, and it was like, each of the things we released, we never released LaunchKit on Product Hunt. It's like, LaunchKit, we're solving all the problems with mobile development. It was like, Review Monitor, this is the one thing we're solving with this. Screenshot Builder, this is the one thing we're solving with this. And that's sort of just become our ethos of like, let's release separate products that do one thing really, really well. And we can make them more complicated if we need to, but like, let's make sure they solve that initial problem really, really well.
About the evolution of Cluster. Is LaunchKit in the same company as Cluster? How does that work, and how is it?
Yeah, we're lucky, because Cluster, again, Cluster was built, well, we originally built Cluster because a bunch of us went on a vacation together, and we had the problem, we got back from vacation, and it was really hard to exchange our photos. I had a free Dropbox account. Someone else dumped their DSLR photos into it. It blew my Dropbox account up. We never were able just to merge them into one album. So Taylor and I, as a total side project and fun thing, just built a little app that essentially, I uploaded photos. It looked at where my photos were, looked at the time and place I took them, and then it sort of built an album that had had like a geofence, and also had time and date. And then when Taylor installed the app, I would invite him to the album, and then it would look at his camera roll for photos taken at the same time in the same place. And this is also before like the iPhone split up photos into like, I don't know if they call them collections or moments or something. This is when the camera roll was just one stream of photos. And so we were able to sort of chunk the photos in different areas of when you took them. And it was a really cool app, and we launched it, and people used it for vacation photos, and it was fun. And then we planned to kind of go back to doing other things. And then people started to use it in a more meaningful way, where they'd have a baby, invite their family and friends who were around at the time, where, the few days when the baby was born, they'd all build an album, and then they'd keep contributing to it. And that's what got Cluster from a fun little side project that solved one very specific problem really well, to like, oh, this is interesting. Like, there's more to this. This is an ongoing thing. People want a private place to share with each other. And so that's the idea that we ended up raising money for and carrying on for the next year and a half. And at the end of the year and a half, almost 2 years since we started building it, we realized that the app was growing. It was growing really well, but it wasn't growing at, like, in my opinion, VC returnable potential kind of growth. People loved it, but the user base just wasn't huge. And so when we decided to build LaunchKit, or wanted to start building LaunchKit, we sat down with our lead investor and we said, Cluster is growing and it's amazing, and we have a really large group of passionate users, but we don't think we're going to be able to turn this into, like, we don't see a time where this will have 1 billion users, right? Like, or 100 million users. Like, this is just private sharing. I think the problem that we're trying to solve is, it's not that we're not solving it well, it's that it's a very hard problem to solve. The private social network thing is a very hard thing, and you've seen this with Path and a ton of other people that have tried this. And anyway, so to get back to your question about, like, is LaunchKit on top of Cluster, what we decided was we were going to start. We said to him, we can either return the money that we had left, and Taylor and I will go off and start working on LaunchKit on our own, or we can continue with building LaunchKit sort of as the same entity and use Cluster as a test bed for all of the stuff that we're building with LaunchKit. And so we made the decision to not sort of recap the company or raise money on a new entity, and just to continue. So we are the same legal entity as Cluster, and we feel like we have a really huge asset with Cluster, because it's not a 100 million user app, but it's got a huge user base. And so when we build stuff for LaunchKit, we generally test it in Cluster for 3 to 6 months before we ever give it to anyone else, and we get to tweak the things that we're building and learn from it. So it's an amazing pool.
If you knew now, let's see, if you can go back to when you were starting Cluster, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
We're sort of talking about this the other day. When you're building an idea, so it's a hard question, because when you're building something that you are that you obsessively love, you always sort of overestimate the impact that you could have by making changes to it. At least we did. So when we launched Cluster originally, I mean, we had like 10 releases in the App Store in the first 13 weeks or something. And then we were like, oh, let's tweak onboarding this way, or let's do this. And we made all these small changes as if they were going to be make massive differences. And we didn't have enough people coming in the funnel to actually tell us that the changes mattered at all. But we were so obsessively tweaking these small things, we didn't like take a step back. It took us a while to take a step back and be like, okay, we need to make some massive changes. And with Cluster, I think I always describe that as, there are a lot of people, we had a lot of competitors that came in, tried what we were doing, and immediately quit when it didn't work. We didn't want to do that. We still believe that that it's a great solution to the problem. And it's a hard problem to solve. And we didn't want to just like take one swing of the bat and then stop. And so we sort of did it in 3 big phases. The first 6 months was like, release this thing and tweak it and see what works. We sort of then went back to the drawing board and said, okay, let's totally reinvent the messaging, the onboarding, like let's reinvent the app. Even though Core did a lot of the same thing, let's bring people in and try to like get them to use it in a new way. Because the insight that we had over the first 6 months is, if we can activate a user and get them to use it a certain way, the retention is insane. Like they just never leave. Like if someone starts building their baby album in Cluster, they just never stop doing that. So the second 6 months, we're taking like, okay, let's take a big step back. And we actually worked with Google Ventures and did one of their sprints and totally reinvented the way that the first user experience of the app worked. Released that, spent another few months measuring, and then decided to take another step back. We were like, it's working better, but we're still having the problem of when a new mom comes in and a kid from some fraternity comes in, they have the same user experience, and that's a problem. So we ended up then we took a bigger step back and said, what's another drastic thing we can try? And we ended up building 5 different apps that all basically had the same core functionality, but were built for different groups. So we built one for teachers, new moms, travelers, and churches, in addition to Cluster, which were our 5 biggest use cases. So I think if I were to go back and like sit down with Taylor and I and give us some advice, to be like, okay, let's look at the initial data that we're getting and then figure out how to make big, meaningful changes, as opposed to like tweaking button colors and the background, whether the onboarding is a carousel or a single page. Like there were just things that we were focusing on that weren't going to move the needle at that stage.
Cool. I want to ask a series of broader questions. If you had $1 billion, what would you do?
Wow. Just personally had $1 billion in the bank.
For your own enjoyment, if you wanted to improve the world, like where that money best be put to use?
It's so far outside of my reality that it's hard to even imagine. I think the majority of it would be used in some sort of a philanthropy. I don't really feel like people need that much money for themselves, and so I think after setting up any kind of education funds or anything that for family and kids and all that stuff, I think that it would probably sort of be split into trying to help people who might necessarily not have the resources without some sort of help. But I don't know. That's a good question. I've literally never really put much time or effort into thinking about it. Like, I don't think I'd try to take the $1 billion and turn it into 10 billion. Like, I don't think that my first motivation wouldn't be like, cool, let's make more. It would sort of be like, what would be something to set aside, and then let's use the rest in a way to help other people. And whether helping other people means like, the more traditional philanthropy of let's go to Africa and help, super poor communities and get more get communities that don't have water. I think there'd be like part of that, but I also think a part of it would just be like, how do we get people anywhere in the world without the opportunity to like have the opportunity to just have their career do what they love doing, as opposed to doing what they have to do to get by. Try to help bring the opportunity to sort of like bring out the talents of people in a more genuine way.
Yeah, what would that look like? I mean, that's fascinating.
I know people who, I was very lucky growing up to be in a family that the constant thing was do what makes you happy. Like whatever you end up doing, if you do what makes you happy, you'll be successful. And it's something that I really believe, and success comes in many different forms. But like, no matter how bad my day ever is, or how bad, like, and this is back when I was in the music industry. When I was in Chicago music industry, I was making almost no money, but I was happy doing it. And so I don't know what the best way to do would be, but like I feel like that philosophy was life changing for me, and it came a lot because I grew up in a family that really pushed me to do that, and my family wasn't constantly worried about the next paycheck, and so their mindset probably allowed them to push me to not think about that, like, or grow up thinking like it wasn't make sure to have the next paycheck. It was do what you love, and the next paycheck will come. How that happens, I feel like it happens probably from a very young age of getting into, working with kids when they're really, really young, to start trying to figure out what they love, as opposed to just school being a thing they have to do. Like what things are interesting to them, what things they love, and trying to help them cultivate like their interest in those, as opposed to just get through high school. So, I don't know. It's an interesting question. It's not something that.
If you were tasked with trying to solve the homelessness in San Francisco, and you had those resources, what would you do?
San Francisco's homeless problem is one of the most complex and confusing social problems that I've ever looked into, and I say that because I haven't spent a ton of time looking into it in other. I mean, Chicago had a homeless problem, but it wasn't anywhere near the visibility and what we see here. The fact that we spend $180 million a year tackling this problem is very disheartening, because I just feel like we should be making a bigger impact. The reality is that San Francisco does a very good job overall in getting people back into homes. Like, we do a really, really good job at it, and the government should get a lot more attention than it does. because, over the past 10 years, they've put 25,000 people back into homes. Unfortunately, I think that number could be wrong. I was used to know these numbers really well, but unfortunately, during the same amount of time, we've had that same amount of people lose their homes. So the problem doesn't seem to be getting better, but the system is working, and there's some really, really great organizations doing really, really great work. The frustrating part to me is, and different people have different opinions, and I've gotten into a lot of trouble on Twitter sort of sharing my opinion, especially because I'm part of the tech community. So anything I say about this, I'm an insensitive asshole. But I think one of the problems that I think is a shame is that we work at Second and Market, and we've been here for a few years, and I've seen the same group of people who live sort of on the street in this area for 2 years, and a good number of them are not the type of people who would be mentally capable of going and getting help themselves. And that's, to me, the hardest part of the San Francisco homeless problem. And I know there's government regulations around like what you can do to offer mental health, and how we can't pay. Mental health facilities have disappeared because of government regulations and stuff like that. But I feel like, there's a group of people who just aren't being helped. There's a lot of people that are being helped and going through the system, but then there's just this group of just chronic homeless. It's called chronic homelessness when they've been on the street for more than a year. And once someone's been on the street for more than a year, there's very little. The chance of them coming off the street is much, much lower. And so I think if I could play a part in it, it would be to get initiatives that really are focusing on the chronic homelessness. Because if you're homeless for a little bit, San Francisco does a great job in getting you back into like a place to live, or getting you on the right path. Like a job that no one really understands about, because all we see are the people that are chronically homeless, and many of them with mental health problems. So, and then it's like this weird, challenging not of a problem, because there's only so much we can do in the mental health side. So I have an emotional connection to it, because I see it every single day, and I wish there was more to do. And I don't know enough about it to say if I have any clue what the solution is. I just know that I know two things. I know, the city does a lot better job than people actually think they do with actually solving homelessness for a large population of homeless people. And we just don't notice it because there's a lot more people coming back onto the street. And B, it's a insanely complex problem that many smart people are working on, and it's disheartening that so much brain power and money is going towards it, and it doesn't feel like it's getting any better.
Right. I mean, it's crazy if aliens came onto this world and it came to San Francisco and saw billionaires next to people who don't have homes. I mean, it's hard to explain.
Yeah, I mean, I think that here's the quote that could be taken out of context that would get me thrown out of San Francisco. But like, fundamentally, I believe two things. I believe first part is the good part, which is this should not be happening. Like, I think that there should be some way of helping the people that are on the street. People shouldn't be living on the street. People who can't take care of themselves shouldn't be living on the street trying to take care of themselves. Like, they need help, and we spend a lot of money to help them, and I don't understand why it doesn't completely connect. That's the good thing. I also don't believe that people who are going to work every day should walk past, should have, like, be in an environment that, I mean, I see people get screamed at by mentally imbalanced people every day, like people in suits going to work. And I don't think that should be a thing. But the reason I don't think that should be a thing is, like, I don't think the person who's screaming at them should be left helpless on the street. I think that person should be able to get help. And it seems like there's something, this is where I don't understand, like, there's something about helping a certain type of person that is not like isn't an automatic thing. I mean, the sad part is, and this is a more drastic way of putting it, is I feel like I walk past people every day who are dying, just like slowly dying.
Yeah.
And the city, like, they're not bleeding out, like they're not like injured and they are dying, but like, there are people that's like, you're not getting any help, and just this, this person is just dying.
Right. It's tragic.
And it's really, really tragic. And I hate the fact that it doesn't seem like that pattern is changing for a lot of people. So, I mean, I think the homeless situation should be broken into two pieces. I think it's the people who have the ability to get back on their feet. And again, San Francisco spends a lot of money and does an extraordinary job helping them get back on their feet. And then there's people that just, I don't think have the ability at this point. Um, and, and I don't feel like there are a lot of solutions for that, except like, oh, we can solve it when the person, you know, there's a member of the community here that has, I would guess I would say psychiatric fits every once in a while, and we can hear her screaming. And in those moments, you know, the police are called and they come and they try to help, but then the police leave, or she goes, you know, she's taken somewhere, but then she's back, and it's
Right.
and she's not getting any better. And I don't feel like there's something missing. There's a missing piece of the money that we spend in the programs that we have for that type of a person, and it's like tragic to watch it happen every day. So.
Right. Fitting background music as the when you think of the term success, who comes to mind, you know, and why, in terms of how you view success?
Say that again. I just noticed this side chat thing, so I got distracted.
Sure. When you think of the term success, who comes to mind in terms of how you view the term success and why?
When I think about success, success to me is just uh, success to me is just being happy, right? Like I would say that some of the most wealthy people that I've seen, that I mean, I know their success in business is wonderful, but like when I truly look at I have a friend that he ended up not doing. He's involved with startups, but he doesn't have a startup. He's smarter than most people I know, so he probably could easily go and do a startup and make, you know, millions and millions of dollars. He chose a more traditional career path, and he's been very lucky because he's built a really wonderful career for himself. He doesn't have, from a wealth perspective, he's not nearly as wealthy as a lot of the people in San Francisco, but I honestly feel like he's done it better than everyone, because he's built this like a great career that he really enjoys, and he has a family that he loves spending time with, and he has a great group of friends, and he's doing what he loves. And so, and I don't want to embarrass him, so I won't mention the name, but like that's the type of person that I tend to feel success, someone who's super successful. I have another friend who is one of the first people at a company that has been one of these unicorns. And out of the people at this company that were there at the beginning, he stayed humble in a way that you would never expect, and he's still family focused, and he still like loves doing the stuff he did at the very beginning. And I think of him as like more successful than the other people who maybe have gotten wealthy through this endeavor, because I feel like he's still like, and I know him better than the other ones, but just like he's managed to stay happy through the process, and the successfulness of his profession has a lot to do with the fact that he's proud of what he does, but the happiness and the success that I see in him is more just like continuing to evolve, being personally happy, and not letting the professional like kind of change who he is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you think of what's something that you've used to fervently believe, whether it was personally or professionally or intellectually, that you've now changed your mind on or now see as misguided?
Well, not to repeat myself, but I was one of those people, like when I was doing my first startup, it was like, oh my God, one day I'll be able to raise money from venture capitalists, and that'll solve all my problems. You know, I thought like, if I can raise money, I will be successful. And um, I mean, I look back and I'm like, yeah, I thought that because I'd never done it before. But I think at the beginning, when I first started getting into this industry, I saw that as, I mean, it is a validation point, and it's a wonderful privilege to be able to have someone make an investment in your company. But it like that just it's anything but, oh, cool, we've made it. You know, we did this big thing. Like it's an impressive thing, and it's a privilege, but it's the very beginning of a very, very long road. And so I think that was a total misconception of mine. I was like, oh, as soon as we can raise money from big company, big well-known VCs, like everything else will just be easy. And it made the fact that we could pay ourselves to work full time on a project easier. But outside of that, like it was just as hard. The other thing that I would probably misconception I used to have and was that press, like a launch day press, was going to change the face of the company. Like if I could, when I was in, I guess it was when I was in Chicago, maybe it was when I was out here, it's like, if I can just get on TechCrunch, everything will be great. And having been fortunate enough to have a lot of launches covered by TechCrunch, like it's great to get a bunch of people looking at your product because you get a lot of early data, but ultimately it doesn't really make a big difference. In certain cases, it probably has made a difference for certain companies, but for the most part, like it helps bring you some users. But if you haven't built a really solid product, that doesn't matter. So actually, to make it even more specific to app development, we thought that being featured by Apple would be like the game changer. And what we learned was, and we were lucky enough we've been featured by Apple a ton for a bunch of our different apps, but with Cluster, we were featured on the main App Store page. And the big misconception there was like, if Apple features us, we'll just see user growth will just spike and it's going to be great and everyone's going to love the app. And what ended up happening was we got featured really before we should have. And MG Sigler wrote a great post last year about this. And the message was, when you are featured, if you get lucky enough to get featured by the App Store, make sure you're ready for it. Because when Cluster was featured, the onboarding and the user experience was awful. And you got to remember, like in the App Store, when people see an app, like a lot of the reason you get these downloads is because people are just willing to try anything. And so when you have someone download an app without really the intention of, I want to use this app because of what it does, they're just curious. If you don't bring them in a very like careful and explanatory way, they're just going to delete the app immediately. And so we sort of missed an opportunity by getting featured by Apple way before we should have gotten featured by Apple.
It seems to be a common thread is like the thing that you think is going to be the real game changer for you, or that has sort of the flashy lights next to it, is often not as big as you think it is.
It never is. I mean, I'm sure there are examples, but no. I mean, you have to build something that is actually solves a real problem and has lasting value. And growth might not spike, but immediately, but it will continue over time and hopefully speed up. And I think that it's so that our industry loves. I mean, overnight successes are the best thing ever for our industry. Talking about there's so many cliche examples now, like Instagram, like all of a sudden became this overnight success after a year of him figuring out what was resonating and what's not. You just need to, I don't know, I think it takes a lot of time to just understand what you're building and make it something that people truly want. And then all the press and getting featured by Apple, all that stuff will come. But I know a lot of people who, they're like, I'm releasing an app. How do I get featured by Apple? And it's sort of, in my opinion, the wrong question to ask before like, wow, this app is working really, really well. And for every 5 users that try it, 4 of them stick around. Like once you have that, then it's a great time to try to get featured by Apple. But when it's, hey, we have a new app that looks really flashy, how do we get featured by Apple? You don't know if you're at that stage yet.
So, right.
The chicken and an egg problem, because you need users to be able to know how you're doing, and it's an easy way to get users to get press, but I just don't think it makes the impact that most people think it does.
Tech is, I mean, obviously sort of everyone wants to start a startup. It's cool. Do you see that only continuing? Do you see sort of this fascination with startup and tech, beyond tech?
You mean more people from other industries getting into tech?
Like, does it just continue to get hot?
I think so. I don't necessarily think it's a hotter thing, because that makes it sound like a trend. I think the reality is that adding technology to most other industries is making those industries more efficient and better. I mean, I think that like Uber's a great example of like amazing company to come in and completely disrupt the taxi industry. But like if the taxi industry would have just added some nice technology to taxis years before Uber, that experience would have gotten a lot better. right? Like, and so I think that there's so many industries, like when it comes to cars or medical or almost anything, like I think we're going to be seeing all of the companies that are traditionally leading in those different industries adding a large tech side to their business because it's just going to make things better. Sometimes it'll hurt. Like music industry, we'll see how this shakes out because you could say that tech and like the internet has hurt the music industry more than it's helped. But I think I think in the end it'll make the music industry much better. We just have to redo some of the business models around what's been the traditional business model of the music industry. But yeah, I don't see it steadily slowing. Um, I think, San Francisco will always probably for the foreseeable future be the epicenter of what the tech industry is. But I think that you'll see strong technical people and teams in all cities building amazing things for themselves or for bigger companies.
And what's your advice for people trying to break into the tech industry who maybe don't live, somewhere on the East Coast or not in San Francisco, but want to someday start a startup or be a part of a great tech company? What advice do you typically?
Um, learn as much as you can about sort of the industry and what people are doing. Like, there's so many people write so much about what they're learning about how to engage users or what just tips on building products. Like when I think about people who want to break into the tech industry, I think of people who want to build a company, which a company has to build a product. So like anyone who wants to sort of start with nothing and build a product with themselves or a team, learn as much as you can from the people who've already done it uh, by reading and just doing research, and then just do it. Like that, it's if someone in I'm from Baltimore, which the tech scene there is getting better, but it's clearly not as the size of it is in the Bay Area. Someone from Baltimore calls me and says like, "Hey, I want to start a startup. What advice do you have?" I don't have. There's not a lot to go with there, but if they like email me, "Hey, I just built this product and we've got 100 people who are trying it. What do you think of it?" Like I can give tons of feedback. Um, and I think my own personal experience when I moved out here, it was even though I was here, like I didn't really feel a part of things until I started just building a bunch of stuff on my own and showing it to people and getting their feedback. And then people could actually see that I was someone who wanted to build new stuff, as opposed to just sort of be a part of the tech industry. Um, so I think the best way to become a part of the tech industry is just to start building products that people can use and try, which is why I think Product Hunt is awesome. Like I remember talking to Ryan really early on and he was getting a bunch of shit because a lot of people will post things to Product Hunt that aren't real companies. They're just interesting little things that people build. And he was getting shit for it. And I remember him being very vocal about like, you don't have to, every product doesn't have to have a business model or a big vision. Like people should be able to build things they think are interesting and maybe they don't have lasting value, but they're cool that they exist. Like, why wouldn't you want to build things to exist? I built a product called Morning Picks, which I eventually posted to Product Hunt, but I built it way long ago. And all it does is you sign in with Instagram. It looks at all of your photos that you've ever taken and sends you a random one every morning. So it's before Time Hop came out, but it's sort of similar, like a nostalgic app. But it's important that it's totally random. It's not last year. It could be 60 days ago. It could be 4 years ago at this point. And I built it. It took me a couple weeks. I released it. I've updated the design a couple times in the past 5 years. But like that product probably got me more visibility and I met more people because of it. Just because it was something that added value to people's day. And then they're like, "Oh, you built that? That's cool. Like, why'd you build it?" And it was like something to talk about. So um, I was able to meet a lot of people and like become more part of the conversation just because I built something that is never going to be a business built on someone else's platform, but it was just like something that adds value. So
That spirit of building products is as a way to get in, is a perfect way to close. Brenden, thank you for coming on Product Hunt Live. Do you have any upcoming plugs, or where people can find you on the internet or ask questions if they have feedback or?
Sure. So I'm at Mulligan on Twitter and always happy to chat with anyone. the only upcoming plug I have is something we're working on LaunchKit right now, which we think is really cool. Is everyone's experienced like an app that will prompt you to leave a review, and it's almost 100% of the time really obnoxious and annoying for the end user. And this is like, I only say this because we've been like really excited. We've been testing something in Cluster, and we feel like we finally cracked the code for getting more reviews without annoying your users. And so anyone who's building an app, like sign up for LaunchKit, and we'll be sharing more information soon. Or plug me on Twitter, and I'll send you a sign up list to early access to it. But it's a really, really exciting thing that we're working on, because we think we're going to be able to reduce the amount of times that most users see that obnoxious pop-up, and make app developers get a lot more positive reviews. So that would be my shameless plug.
That's awesome. Brenden, as an investor, you've been an active supporter, hell of an active user, and an active friend. So thank you for everything you've done for us.
Yeah, thank you, and congrats on all the continued success that Product Hunt is having.
Absolutely. I'll talk to you soon, Brett.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for another fantastic episode of Product Hunt Live. If you liked what you hear, tweet at Mulligan. Let him know, Mulligan. Brenden is a fantastic dude, as you just saw, and has been great with Product Hunt ever since the beginning, when he was one of the first investors. Thank you guys for joining us. If you have any feedback for us, you can tweet at Product Hunt or at Eric Tornberg, ErikTornberg. Again, make sure you give a positive shout out to Brenden, and see you on the next episode of Product Hunt Live. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Peace.